The fluorescent lights in the Laredo Border Patrol detention facility buzzed like angry wasps as Natasha Romano sat motionless in the plastic chair, her wrists bound with zip ties that had already begun to leave marks on her olive skin. For 3 hours, she had maintained perfect silence while Agent Carlos Mendez paced the concrete floor, his polished boots clicking a rhythm that betrayed his growing frustration. He had expected tears by now, pleas for understanding, the usual. Breakdown that came when people realized their carefully constructed lies were crumbling around them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Instead, Natasha sat with the stillness of someone who had learned patience in places where impatience could mean death. Her dark hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, and she wore the kind of unremarkable clothes that made people forget her. Face the moment she left their sight: faded jeans, a cream-colored sweater, and worn leather flats that had walked thousands of miles across terrain that didn't appear on any tourist maps. The only jewelry she wore was a thin silver chain around her neck, hidden beneath her sweater, holding a pendant that would have raised very different questions if anyone had seen it. Mendez stopped pacing and slammed a manila folder onto the metal table between them. Photographs spilled out, surveillance images of Natasha crossing the border at various points over the past 3 years, always with different documents, always with a slightly different appearance, always moving with the confident ease of someone who belonged wherever she happened to be. "Natasha Romano," he said, his voice heavy with the authority of someone who believed he held all the cards. "Maria Santos, Elena Vasquez, Carmen Rodriguez. 4 different identities, 4 different passports, all with your face." Natasha's gray eyes moved to the photographs with the mild interest of someone examining weather reports for a city they would never visit. She had seen these images before, knew they existed in databases she had helped create years ago when the world was a different place and she was a different person. The technology to track someone like her had improved dramatically since then, but the people using it had not. "The State Department has no record of you," Mendez continued, settling into the chair across from her. "Homeland Security shows you as a person of interest in several ongoing investigations. Immigration has you flagged as a potential smuggling coordinator." He leaned forward, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and see the small scar above his left eyebrow that suggested he had not always worked behind a desk. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me who you really are, who you work for, and why you've been moving back and forth across this border like you own it. And then maybe, just maybe, we can work something out." Natasha spoke for the first time since they had brought her in, her voice carrying the faint accent of someone who had learned English as a second language, but spoke it with the precision of a trained linguist. "I would like to make a phone call." Mendez laughed, a sound without humor. "This isn't a television show, sweetheart. You don't get a phone call until we know what we're dealing with. For all I know, you're coordinating with cartel operations, human trafficking networks, or worse." He tapped one of the photographs with his index finger. "This image shows you crossing near Brownsville with a group of Central American families. 3 days later, those same families disappeared from the processing center. Care to explain that?" The fluorescent light above them flickered, casting intermittent shadows across Natasha's face. She understood the game Mendez was playing because she had played it herself in rooms much less comfortable than this one, with stakes much higher than anything the Border Patrol typically handled. The families he was talking about had indeed disappeared, but not in the way he imagined. They were safe now, relocated to places where their testimonies about government corruption in their home countries could be properly documented and acted upon. The network that had moved them operated with funding and authorization that came from agencies Mendez had probably never heard of. "I would like to make a phone call," she repeated, her tone unchanged. 3 months earlier, Natasha Romano had been living the kind of invisible life that took years to perfect. Her small apartment above Esperanza Books occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house in the historic district of Laredo, where the morning sun filtered through lace curtains that had been hanging in the same windows since the 1940s. The bookstore below specialized in bilingual children's literature and immigration law resources, serving a community that straddled 2 countries and often felt fully welcome in neither. Every morning at exactly 5:47 a.m., Natasha descended the narrow wooden stairs that creaked in places she had long since memorized, unlocked the bookstore's front door, and began her daily ritual of preparing for customers who needed more than just books. She moved through the space with the efficient grace of someone who had learned to make herself useful without drawing attention, straightening shelves that were already straight, organizing paperwork that was already organized, and brewing coffee that somehow always tasted exactly right. The locals knew her as the quiet woman who spoke perfect Spanish and English with equal fluency, who could explain complex immigration forms with patience that seemed inexhaustible, and who somehow always knew which documents were actually required, versus which ones were just bureaucratic intimidation tactics. Families would bring her papers they couldn't understand, regulations that seemed designed to confuse rather than inform, and she would guide them through the maze of requirements with the competence of someone who had navigated much more dangerous labyrinths. Mrs. Elena Gutierrez, who ran the panaderia next door, had tried for 2 years to extract personal information from Natasha beyond the basic pleasantries of daily interaction. "You speak like someone with education," she would say, while arranging conchas in the display case. "University, maybe? You have the hands of someone who has worked with papers, not just books." But Natasha would always redirect the conversation to Mrs. Gutierrez's grandchildren, or the weather, or the quality of the morning's bread, deflecting curiosity with the skill of someone who had practice. The truth was that Natasha's hands had indeed worked with papers, though not the kind that Mrs. Gutierrez imagined. In a previous life that felt simultaneously like yesterday and a century ago, those hands had handled documents that could topple governments, intelligence reports that could start wars, and communication intercepts that revealed the real motivations behind diplomatic negotiations that played out on television screens around the world. She had coordinated operations across borders that existed more in theory than practice, managing assets who risked their lives to gather information that would never be acknowledged publicly. Her apartment reflected the careful minimalism of someone prepared to disappear at a moment's notice. The furniture was functional but comfortable, purchased from local stores with cash and chosen for durability rather than style. She owned exactly 3 books, a Spanish-English dictionary, a collection of Pablo Neruda's poetry, and a technical manual on radio communications that was hidden inside the dust jacket of a cookbook. Her clothes were well made but unremarkable, the kind that could blend into any crowd in any city on either side of the border. But it was the hidden elements of her life that would have told the real story to anyone trained to recognize them. The smoke detector in her bedroom contained a GPS beacon that transmitted her location to a satellite network most governments believed was used for weather monitoring. The coffee maker in her kitchen had been modified to receive encrypted communications on frequencies that officially didn't exist. And beneath the loose floorboard under her bed was a waterproof case containing documents that proved Natasha Romano was not her real name, that her current life was not her first life, and that her quiet existence in Laredo was authorized by people who operated in the spaces between official government agencies. The Ghost Protocol was a classification that existed in the margins of international intelligence operations, designed for operatives who had been burned, compromised, or strategically relocated, but whose expertise was too valuable to lose entirely. Ghost Protocol assets maintained deep cover identities while serving as early warning systems. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Safe house coordinators and emergency extraction specialists for operations that required plausible deniability. They were officially dead, unofficially essential, and completely expendable if their cover was blown or their usefulness expired. Natasha had been Ghost Protocol for 3 years, ever since the operation in Caracas had gone catastrophically wrong and half her team had died in a government crackdown that someone had leaked to the wrong people. The extraction had taken 48 hours of running through jungle terrain while dodging military patrols that knew exactly where to look for them. When she finally reached the extraction point, bloodied and exhausted, her handler had informed her that Natasha Volkov was now officially dead, killed in a car accident in Prague that had been carefully staged with dental records and DNA evidence. That would satisfy any investigation. Natasha Romano had been born 24 hours later in a safe house outside Mexico City, complete with a backstory that would withstand casual scrutiny and documentation that would pass any database check, short of the most classified intelligence reviews. She had been given a simple mission: establish a normal life, integrate into the local community, and wait for activation while serving as a monitoring post for unusual activity along one of the most porous borders in the world. For 3 years, the mission had been exactly as boring as it was supposed to be. She filed weekly reports that usually contained nothing more significant than observations about local drug trafficking patterns and updates on immigration policy changes that might affect intelligence operations. Her handlers checked in through coded messages hidden in spam emails and junk mail that looked like advertisements for products she would never buy. The most excitement she had experienced was helping coordinate the quiet relocation of a Honduran journalist whose reporting on government corruption had made her a target for assassination. The journalist's extraction had been elegant in its simplicity. Natasha had met the woman at the bookstore under the cover of helping her understand asylum procedures, had provided her with new documentation and travel funds hidden inside language learning materials, and had guided her to a pickup point where other assets had taken over the next phase of her journey to safety. The operation had been completed without official knowledge or approval, funded through black budget allocations that appeared in federal accounting as maintenance costs for buildings that didn't exist. That extraction had been 3 months ago, and Natasha had assumed it would be forgotten like dozens of similar operations she had facilitated. The people she helped disappeared into new lives with new identities, and the problems they had been fleeing usually faded into the background. Noise of international conflicts that attracted attention only when they reached crisis levels. She had developed a comfortable routine of useful invisibility, serving her community during the day and serving her country in ways that would never appear in any official record. But comfort was a luxury that people in her position could never truly afford, and routine was a pattern that eventually attracted the attention of people trained to notice patterns. Agent Carlos Mendez had been tracking irregular border crossings for 18 months, building databases of facial recognition, matches, and travel pattern anomalies that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. The journalist's disappearance had triggered a broader investigation into human trafficking networks, and Natasha's face had appeared in too many surveillance images to be explained by random chance. When Mendez had finally connected enough dots to request authorization for her detention, he had expected to uncover a smuggling operation or cartel coordination network. Instead, he had captured someone whose very existence was classified at levels he had never imagined. Someone whose detention would trigger communication protocols that reached into the highest levels of government intelligence operations. As Natasha sat in the detention facility, maintaining her calm exterior while calculating the probability that her cover could be salvaged, she knew that her quiet life in Laredo was ending. The question was whether it would end with a quiet relocation to another Ghost Protocol assignment or with something much more permanent. The pendant hidden beneath her sweater contained a communication device that would signal her handlers that her cover was blown. But activating it would also mark her as a security risk that might need to be permanently resolved. The fluorescent light above continued its mechanical buzzing, marking time in a room where time seemed to move differently than in the world outside. Natasha closed her eyes and began to mentally review the protocol she had hoped never to use, preparing for a conversation that would determine whether Natasha Romano would live to see another sunset or whether she would join Natasha Volkov in the growing list of identities that existed only in classified files and encrypted memories. In rooms like this one, she had learned, the difference between survival and elimination often came down to knowing exactly when to reveal the truth and when to let lies stand as protection. The game was about to begin, and the stakes were higher than Agent Mendez could possibly understand. The phone call that would change everything came at 11:34 p.m. on a Tuesday, when most of Laredo was settling into the quiet rhythms of sleep. Natasha had been reviewing inventory reports for the bookstore, cross-referencing orders for immigration law, guides with the seasonal patterns of border crossings that told their own story about human desperation and hope. The secure phone hidden in her coffee maker had remained silent for 6 weeks, an unusual stretch that had begun to make her wonder if her handlers had finally decided her usefulness had expired. When the device finally activated with 3 short pulses followed by a longer tone, Natasha felt her pulse quicken in ways that 3 years of peaceful routine had not entirely erased. She moved to the kitchen window, checking the street below for any signs of surveillance before extracting the phone from its concealment. The caller ID showed only a string of numbers that appeared random but contained coordinates and timestamps that identified the caller as Director Helen Blackwood, her primary handler and one of only 4 people in the world authorized to activate Ghost Protocol assets directly. Romano, Natasha answered, using the identification protocol that confirmed her status and location. Blackwood's voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone who had been awakened from sleep to deal with a crisis that could not wait for normal business hours. Package requires immediate extraction. High-value target with time-sensitive intelligence. Pickup location is compromised. You are the closest asset with appropriate language skills and border knowledge. Natasha moved to her bedroom while listening, already beginning the mental calculations that would determine whether this operation was survivable or a suicide mission disguised as an emergency assignment. "What kind of package?" she asked, pulling her emergency go bag from beneath the bed and checking its contents with practiced efficiency. Dr. Vincent Cross, former State Department intelligence analyst, current freelance consultant. He has been working undercover in Nuevo Laredo, documenting human trafficking networks with ties to foreign intelligence services. His cover was blown 6 hours ago. Mexican authorities are actively hunting him, and there are indications that cartel sicarios have been contracted to eliminate him before he can be extracted. The name Vincent Cross triggered memories that Natasha had carefully compartmentalized. During her years of quiet exile, Cross had been her handler during the Caracas operation, the man who had coordinated the intelligence gathering that was supposed to prevent a government coup, but had instead walked her team into an ambush that killed 3 operatives and nearly eliminated her entire network. She had assumed he was dead, killed in the bureaucratic purge that had followed the operation's failure. "Cross is still operational?" she asked, loading specialized equipment into a worn leather messenger bag that looked like something a graduate student might carry. He never left the field. After Caracas, he was reassigned to deep cover operations tracking international criminal networks. The intelligence he has gathered over the past 3 years would expose trafficking operations in 12 countries and identify foreign agents operating within U.S. government agencies. Blackwood's voice carried the weight of someone delivering information that could reshape international relations. He cannot be allowed to fall into hostile hands. Natasha checked her watch. calculating travel times and border crossing protocols. Where is he now? Safe house in Nuevo Laredo, approximately 8 kilometers from your current location. The house will be compromised within the next 4 to 6 hours. Mexican federal police are conducting a building-by-building search of the neighborhood under the pretense of a drug operation. Cross has documentation that will allow him to cross legally, but he needs escort and backup in case the crossing becomes complicated. The complexity of the situation became clear to Natasha as she reviewed the tactical challenges. Cross would be traveling with intelligence that multiple governments would kill to possess or destroy. The border crossing at Laredo was one of the most heavily monitored in the Western Hemisphere, with surveillance systems that could identify faces, voices, and behavioral patterns that suggested deception or distress. Getting him across would require more than just paperwork. It would require performance under pressure and the kind of operational expertise that she had not used in 3 years. What support will be available? She asked, changing into clothes that would blend with late-night border traffic. Dark jeans, a simple black sweater, and a jacket that concealed the specialized communication equipment she would need to coordinate the extraction. Minimal. This operation is off the books. If you are captured or killed, there will be no official acknowledgement of your status or mission. You will be disavowed completely. Blackwood paused, letting the implications settle. However, successful completion will result in full reinstatement to active status with your choice of assignments. The offer of reinstatement carried implications that extended far beyond this single operation. Ghost protocol assets were typically considered permanently burned, too compromised for return to active intelligence work. The fact that Blackwood was suggesting otherwise meant that the intelligence Cross possessed was valuable enough to justify extraordinary risks. It also meant that Natasha's years of exile might finally be ending. Time frame for extraction? She asked, loading cash, backup documentation, and emergency medical supplies into hidden compartments of her messenger bag. Cross will attempt border crossing at 0300 hours. You will provide overwatch and intervention if complications arise. Primary crossing point is Bridge of the Americas. Backup location is Gateway to the Americas Bridge if primary becomes compromised. Natasha moved to her bathroom and began applying subtle changes to her appearance. Different eyebrow shape, slightly altered hairline, makeup that changed the apparent bone structure of her face. The modifications were minor, but would be enough to confuse facial recognition systems. That might be programmed to identify her current appearance. What about my cover here? 3 years of integration will be blown if this goes wrong. Your cover was already compromised. Border Patrol has been building a case against you for irregular crossing patterns. Agent Carlos Mendez requested authorization for your detention yesterday. This extraction is your opportunity to disappear before that authorization is approved. The revelation that her cover was blown hit Natasha with the cold shock of someone who had believed herself safely hidden, discovering that she had been exposed for months. Mendez was known within intelligence circles as a competent but unimaginative investigator who specialized in pattern recognition and data analysis. If he had connected enough dots to request her detention, then other agencies with more sophisticated capabilities had certainly noticed her activities. How long have you known? She asked, testing the weight of the Glock 19 that had been hidden in the false bottom of her jewelry box for 3 years. 2 weeks. We were planning your relocation when Cross situation developed. This operation serves multiple purposes. We extract a valuable asset, we remove you from a compromised position, and we test your readiness for return to active status. Natasha understood the calculation. Her extraction of Cross would be a live fire exercise, a demonstration that 3 years of civilian life had not degraded her operational capabilities. Success would prove she could still function at the level required for deep cover intelligence work. Failure would resolve the problem of what to do with a burned asset whose knowledge made her too dangerous to abandon, but too compromised for continued deployment. "Understood," she said, checking the load on her weapon and ensuring the safety was properly engaged. "What intelligence does Cross possess that makes this worth the risk?" Evidence that human trafficking networks along the Mexican border are being used as cover for foreign intelligence operations. Agents from at least 3 hostile nations have been using smuggling routes to insert operatives into the United States. Additionally, Cross has identified corruption within U.S. agencies that has facilitated these operations. The scope of the intelligence explained why multiple agencies would be willing to kill to prevent its release. Foreign intelligence operatives, using human trafficking routes, could have been building networks within the United States for years without detection. The corruption implications suggested that some of the failure to stop these operations had been deliberate rather than accidental. "How do I identify Cross?" she asked, memorizing the communication protocols and emergency signals that would be essential if the operation went wrong. White male, approximately 55 years old, graying hair, medium build. He will be wearing a University of Texas baseball cap and carrying a brown leather briefcase. Recognition phrase is "the weather in Houston is unseasonably warm." Your response is, "but the forecast calls for clearing skies." Natasha committed the description and recognition protocol to memory while completing her preparation. What happens after extraction? Immediate debriefing at a secure facility, then reassignment based on operational needs and your preferences. Your ghost protocol status will be officially terminated. The promise of return to active status carried both appeal and uncertainty. 3 years of quiet life had given Natasha time to consider whether she wanted to return to a world where survival depended on constant vigilance and where relationships were tactical considerations rather than genuine human connections. The bookstore community had offered her something she had never experienced: the possibility of belonging somewhere without pretense or deception. But the conversation with Blackwood had reminded her of something she had tried to forget. During her exile, she was extraordinarily good at work that few people could do, and that work mattered in ways that extended far beyond her personal comfort or safety. Cross possessed intelligence that could save lives and prevent attacks that would never be acknowledged publicly. The human trafficking networks he had infiltrated destroyed families and funded operations that threatened national security on multiple levels. "I'll need 30 minutes to reach the crossing area," she said, taking a final look around the apartment that had been her home for 3 years. "Cross will be in position at 0245 hours. Communication frequency will be 162.475 MHz. Encryption protocol 7. Emergency extraction signal is 3 long tones followed by 2 short. Abort signal is continuous tone for 15 seconds. Natasha checked her watch again. It was now 11:52 p.m., giving her slightly more than 3 hours to reach the crossing point and establish overwatch positions that would allow her to identify potential threats and coordinate Cross's safe passage. The timeline was tight but manageable if everything went according to plan. "Understood. Romano out." She disconnected the call and activated the phone's emergency destruction protocol, which would render the device unusable and untraceable. Within 60 seconds, the chemical process that destroyed the phone's memory and communication circuits produced a small puff of smoke that smelled like burning plastic, a scent that would remind her years later of the moment when her quiet life ended and her real life resumed. Moving through her apartment one final time, Natasha gathered the few personal items that were small enough to carry and meaningful enough to justify the risk. The Neruda poetry collection that had belonged to her grandmother, a photograph of her parents taken before they understood what their daughter would become, and the silver pendant that contained communication equipment but also held sentimental value from a relationship that had ended when she accepted her first intelligence. Assignment. She left everything else exactly as it was, knowing that investigators would eventually search the apartment and analyze her possessions for clues about her real identity and activities. The books on the shelves, the clothes in the closet, and the minimal decorations would tell the story of Natasha Romano, quiet bookstore worker and immigration helper, but would reveal nothing about the person who had lived behind that identity. As she prepared to leave the apartment for the last time, Natasha felt the familiar mental shift that occurred when transitioning from civilian life to operational status. Her awareness sharpened, her movements became more deliberate, and her mind began processing environmental details through the filter of tactical assessment rather than everyday routine. The sounds from the street below became potential indicators of surveillance or threat. The shadows outside her windows became concealment opportunities or hiding places for hostile observers. The woman who descended the stairs and stepped into the Laredo night was no longer Natasha Romano, community helper and bookstore worker. She was an intelligence operative with years of training and experience, carrying specialized equipment and authorization to use whatever force was necessary to complete her mission. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Cross was waiting somewhere in the darkness across the river, surrounded by people who wanted him dead and carrying intelligence that could change international relations. Between him and safety lay 8 kilometers of urban terrain controlled by cartels, federal police, and various other groups whose interests were served by preventing his extraction. Natasha disappeared into the shadows, moving with the silent efficiency of someone returning to work she had been born to do, carrying the weight of a mission that would determine whether Vincent Cross would live to deliver his intelligence or die in the maze of streets that separated 2 countries and 2 very different versions of justice. The safe house in Nuevo Laredo occupied the 3rd floor of a building that had once been a prosperous textile factory but now served as cover for activities that required privacy and multiple exit routes. Natasha approached through the industrial district, moving between abandoned warehouses and rusted machinery that created a landscape of shadows and concealment opportunities. The Mexican side of the border carried a different energy than Laredo, heavier with the weight of economic desperation and the constant awareness that survival often depended on knowing which questions not to ask. She had crossed the Rio Grande, using a route that existed in the margins of official border security, a series of storm drains and maintenance tunnels that connected the 2 cities, beneath the heavily monitored bridges and checkpoints. The crossing had taken 45 minutes of careful movement through spaces that smelled of stagnant water and industrial chemicals, emerging near the rail yard where freight trains carried legitimate cargo alongside compartments that contained items never listed on any manifest. The communication frequency Blackwood had provided crackled to life as Natasha reached the observation position she had selected in a abandoned grain elevator that offered clear sight lines to the safe house, while remaining invisible to casual surveillance. Cross's voice came through the encrypted channel with the controlled tension of someone who had been hunted for longer than anticipated. Overwatch, this is package. Situation has deteriorated. Federal police raid began 20 minutes early. Building is surrounded. Multiple units, approximately 30 officers with tactical gear. Natasha adjusted her position to get a better view of the safe house, using night vision equipment that revealed the scope of the police operation. Uniformed officers had established a perimeter around the entire block while tactical units prepared for building entry. The operation was larger and more sophisticated than a routine drug raid, suggesting that someone had provided specific intelligence about Cross's location and importance. Package, this is Overwatch. Confirm your current position and status, she transmitted, scanning the surrounding area for alternative extraction routes. 3rd floor, southwest corner room. Building has been evacuated except for suspected targets. Officers are conducting floor-by-floor search starting from ground level. Estimate 15 minutes before they reach my position. The tactical situation was rapidly becoming impossible. Cross was trapped in a building surrounded by legitimate law enforcement officers who were conducting what appeared to be a legal operation. Any attempt to extract him would require engaging Mexican federal police, an action that would create international incidents and expose intelligence operations that were supposed to remain completely deniable. Natasha activated her secondary communication channel, reaching Blackwood on an emergency frequency that bypassed normal operational security protocols. Control, this is Overwatch. Package extraction compromised. Recommend abort and establish alternative pickup location. Blackwood's response carried stress that revealed how much was riding on Cross's successful extraction. Negative on abort. Package possesses time-sensitive intelligence that cannot be delayed. Mexican operation was leaked by hostile actors seeking to prevent extraction. Alternative solutions authorized. The authorization for alternative solutions was intelligence, community language for permission to use whatever force was necessary to complete the mission, including actions that would normally be considered acts of war if conducted on foreign soil. Natasha understood that she was being given permission to engage Mexican law enforcement officers who were unknowingly serving the interests of foreign intelligence services that wanted Cross dead. Control, engaging Mexican federal police will create significant complications. Recommend negotiating official extraction through diplomatic channels. Time frame for diplomatic solution is 72 to 96 hours. Package will not survive that long. Intelligence indicates cartel sicarios are en route to eliminate package regardless of police custody. You are authorized to use any means necessary to prevent package from falling into hostile hands. The revelation that cartel assassins were also converging on Cross's location transformed the tactical situation from difficult to desperate. Mexican federal police were conducting a legitimate operation based on intelligence they believed was reliable, not knowing they were being manipulated by foreign agents who wanted Cross eliminated. The sicarios would not be constrained by legal procedures or concern for civilian casualties. Natasha moved to a different observation position that provided better coverage of the approaches to the safe house. Through her night vision scope, she could see vehicles arriving that did not match the official police units already on scene. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows had positioned themselves at strategic points around the perimeter, and men were emerging who moved with the tactical precision of special operations personnel rather than the disciplined formation of regular law enforcement. Package, be advised that additional hostile forces are arriving on scene. Cartel operators, approximately 12 personnel with military-grade equipment. They appear to be preparing for assault on your position. Cross's voice remained controlled. Despite the deteriorating situation. Understood, Overwatch. I have emergency destruction protocols for sensitive materials if capture becomes inevitable. Priority intelligence has been uploaded to secure servers, but supporting documentation requires physical extraction. The supporting documentation Cross was referring to contained evidence that could not be transmitted electronically without risking interception by hostile intelligence services. Physical documents, photographs, and recorded conversations that proved foreign intelligence operations were using human trafficking networks to insert agents into the United States. Evidence that identified specific American officials who had been compromised or recruited by foreign services. Natasha realized that the Mexican police operation was not just an attempt to capture Cross, but part of a larger operation to eliminate evidence of foreign intelligence activities. The timing was too perfect, the resources too extensive for a simple arrest operation. Someone with access to classified intelligence had coordinated multiple agencies to ensure that Cross and his evidence would be permanently silenced. Control. Situation assessment indicates this is coordinated elimination operation, not random compromise. Someone with high-level access provided intelligence to hostile actors, Blackwood's response confirmed Natasha's analysis. Agreed. Cross-investigation identified foreign agents within State Department and Border Patrol agencies. His extraction threatens to expose networks that have been operational for years. Assume all communications are compromised except emergency frequencies. The implications of Blackwood's warning sent cold realization through Natasha's assessment of the situation. If foreign agents had penetrated agencies responsible for border security, then Cross's intelligence about trafficking networks being used for espionage was not historical information, but ongoing operational reality. The people trying to kill Cross were not just protecting past operations, but preventing exposure of current activities. Through her observation scope, Natasha watched as the cartel operators began moving into position for assault on the building. They moved with coordination that suggested extensive training and experience with urban warfare tactics. Their equipment included night vision systems, communications gear, and weapons that were significantly more advanced than anything typically available to criminal organizations. Package cartel units are preparing for building assault. They have military-grade equipment and training that suggests foreign sponsorship. Recommend immediate relocation to alternate position within building. Negative on relocation. Police units control all stairwells and elevators. I am effectively trapped in current position. However, building has service tunnels that connect to steam distribution system for the industrial district. Possible extraction route if you can reach building basement. The steam tunnel system Cross was describing had been built in the 1940s to provide heating for the textile factories that had once made Nuevo Laredo a center for legitimate manufacturing. The tunnels had been abandoned for decades, but would still provide concealed movement through the industrial district if they remained structurally sound and accessible. Natasha began moving toward the safe house, using the abandoned machinery and industrial infrastructure as concealment while avoiding the police perimeter. The cartel operators had focused their surveillance on the building's obvious approaches, but the industrial setting provided numerous routes that required specialized knowledge to identify and navigate. Package initiating movement to extraction. Point: estimate 20 minutes to reach basement access. Be prepared for immediate departure when I signal. Understood, Overwatch. Be advised that I am not the only target in this building. There are 3 other individuals in protective custody who possess supporting intelligence. Extraction must include all personnel or intelligence will be incomplete. The revelation that Cross was not alone in the building fundamentally changed the complexity of the extraction operation. 3 additional people meant more time required for movement through confined spaces, greater probability of detection, and exponentially increased risk if the operation went wrong. It also meant that failure would result in multiple deaths, rather than a single loss of assets. Package identify additional personnel and their status. Maria Santos, Honduran journalist who documented government corruption, links to trafficking networks. David Chun, former Border Patrol agent who discovered foreign intelligence infiltration of agency databases. Lisa Rodriguez, immigration attorney who identified pattern of asylum case manipulation by hostile actors. Each of the additional targets represented a different aspect of the foreign intelligence operation Cross had been investigating. Santos had documented how government corruption in Central America facilitated trafficking operations that served intelligence purposes. Chun had discovered how border security databases were being manipulated to allow certain individuals to cross without proper screening. Rodriguez had identified how asylum procedures were being exploited to provide cover for foreign operatives. Together, the 4 individuals possessed evidence that could expose a comprehensive foreign intelligence operation that had been years in development. Their elimination would protect networks that extended from Central American government officials to American border security personnel to immigration courts that processed asylum cases. Natasha reached the basement access point for the building, a service entrance that had been secured with chains and padlocks that showed signs of recent cutting and replacement. Someone had been using this entrance regularly, suggesting that the safe house operation was more complex than a simple hiding place for Cross and his companions. As she prepared to enter the building, her communication equipment detected encrypted transmissions on frequencies used by American intelligence services. Someone was coordinating the police operation from a command post that was not visible from her observation positions. The transmissions were brief and coded, but their timing coincided with tactical movements by both police and cartel units. Control, detecting American intelligence communications, coordinating hostile operation. Foreign agents have access to our communication protocols and operational procedures. Blackwood's response carried the strain of someone dealing with a crisis that extended far beyond a single extraction operation. Confirmed. Cross-investigation revealed foreign intelligence services have recruited assets within multiple agencies. Assume operational security is completely compromised. Complete extraction using emergency protocols only. Emergency protocols meant that Natasha was now operating without backup or support, using equipment and procedures that were designed for situations where all normal intelligence operations had been compromised. She would have no communication with friendly forces, no extraction assistance if the operation failed, and no official acknowledgement if she was captured or killed. The basement of the safe house smelled of decades of abandonment and recent human occupation. Emergency lighting provided minimal visibility while she navigated through storage areas and mechanical rooms toward the steam tunnel access that would allow her to reach Cross and the other targets. The building's structure showed signs of modification, with walls that had been reinforced and doorways that had been altered to provide better security and multiple escape routes. As she moved through the basement, Natasha heard the sounds of tactical teams beginning their assault on the upper floors. Boots on stairs, radio communications, and the systematic clearing of rooms that indicated professional law enforcement operations. The timing suggested that both police and cartel units were coordinating their activities to prevent Cross and his companions from escaping through any conventional route. The steam tunnel access was concealed behind a false wall that required specific knowledge to locate and open. Cross had provided the location coordinates during their communication, but finding the actual entrance required careful examination of what appeared to be solid concrete construction. When she finally located the hidden release mechanism, the wall section swung open to reveal a maintenance tunnel that stretched into darkness beyond the reach of her flashlight. Package, this is Overwatch. I have reached extraction point. Prepare for immediate departure with all personnel. Cross's response came through her earpiece with the sound of approaching footsteps in the background. Moving now. Police units are 2 floors above current. Position, estimate 5 minutes before they reach our level. Natasha entered the steam tunnel and began moving toward the shaft that would allow her to reach the 3rd floor where Cross and his companions were trapped. The tunnel system was more extensive than she had anticipated, with branches that led to other buildings and access points that could provide multiple escape routes if properly navigated. As she climbed through the maintenance shaft, her communication equipment detected a new signal that made her blood run cold. Border Patrol frequencies were active in the area, with Agent Carlos Mendez coordinating surveillance operations that were designed to intercept anyone attempting to cross back into the United States. The extraction operation was not just about getting Cross out of the building, but getting all 4 targets across the border before they could be captured by American agents who were unknowingly serving foreign intelligence interests. The trap was more comprehensive than anyone had anticipated, extending across both sides of the border and involving agencies that believed they were conducting legitimate law enforcement operations. Cross and his companions were being hunted by foreign agents, Mexican federal police, cartel sicarios, and American border security personnel, all of whom had been given intelligence that would ensure the targets could not escape alive. Natasha reached the third-floor access point and began the most dangerous phase of the extraction operation, knowing that success would require her to outmaneuver multiple hostile forces while protecting 4 people who carried intelligence that could reshape international relations. The game had become larger and more deadly than anyone had planned, but the stakes were too high to consider anything other than complete success. The maintenance shaft that connected the steam tunnels to the third floor was barely wide enough for one person, and the metal rungs were slick with decades of condensation and industrial grime. Natasha climbed in complete darkness, relying on muscle memory and tactical training to navigate through spaces that would disorient anyone without extensive experience in confined operations. Above her, the sounds of the police search grew louder. As tactical teams systematically cleared each room, their progress marked by shouted commands and the crash of doors being forced open. When she reached the access panel that led to the third floor, Natasha could hear voices directly above her. Position. Cross was speaking in low, urgent tones to his companions, explaining extraction procedures while preparing emergency destruction of documents that could not be allowed to fall into hostile hands. Through the thin metal panel, she could make out 4 distinct voices: Cross's American accent, Maria Santos speaking Spanish with the precise diction of an educated journalist, David Chun's measured tones carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing law enforcement personnel, and Lisa Rodriguez speaking English with the slight accent of someone who had learned the language as an adult but mastered it professionally. Natasha tapped the recognition signal against the access panel. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. The response came immediately. 2 long, 1 short, 2 long. Cross had confirmed that all 4 targets were in position and ready for extraction. She carefully opened the panel and emerged into a storage room that had been converted into a communication center, with laptops displaying encrypted files and communication equipment that would allow secure contact with intelligence services. On both sides of the border, Cross looked older than she remembered from their brief collaboration during the Caracas operation, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent in hostile environments where relaxation could be fatal. But his movements retained the controlled efficiency of someone whose survival had depended on making correct decisions under pressure. He gestured toward the other 3 individuals who waited near the room's single window, each carrying a small bag that contained their most essential evidence and personal items. Maria Santos was younger than her voice had suggested, perhaps 35, with the intense focus of someone who had spent years documenting atrocities that most people preferred to ignore. Her bag contained hard drives with recorded interviews, photographs of government officials meeting with known trafficking coordinators, and financial documents that traced corruption money through multiple international banks. David Chun carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who had spent 20 years in federal law enforcement, his equipment bag containing backup copies of Border Patrol databases that showed systematic manipulation of crossing records and background checks. Lisa Rodriguez moved with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to working under deadline pressure. Her materials, including court documents that proved asylum cases, were being decided based on criteria that had nothing to do with legitimate refugee status. Extraction route is through steam tunnel system to industrial district, then crossing via maintenance tunnels beneath the rail yard, Natasha explained, checking her watch and calculating the timing required to reach the border. Before dawn. Travel will be single file, complete silence, no communication except emergency signals. If anyone falls behind or becomes separated, continue without them. The harsh reality of extraction operations was that individual survival was secondary to mission completion. If one person was captured or injured, the others had to continue or risk losing intelligence that could save hundreds of lives and prevent foreign intelligence operations from continuing their infiltration of American security agencies. Cross, secured his laptop and communication equipment, while the others completed their preparations. Police teams are approximately 3 minutes from this floor. Cartel units have positioned snipers in surrounding buildings. American Border Patrol has established checkpoints at all official crossing points. What's our probability of successful extraction? Natasha considered the tactical situation while opening the access panel that would take them back into the maintenance shaft. 15% if everything goes perfectly, 5% with normal complications. But the intelligence you're carrying justifies the risk. The group began descending through the maintenance system with Natasha leading, and Cross bringing up the rear to ensure no one was left behind. The shaft was designed for individual maintenance workers, not groups of 4 people carrying equipment bags, and progress was slow and claustrophobic. Above them, the sounds of the police search grew closer as tactical teams reached their floor, and began the room-by-room clearing that would discover their abandoned communications center within minutes. When they reached the basement level, Natasha led them through the maze of storage areas and mechanical rooms toward the steam tunnel entrance. The building's basement extended further than she had initially realized, with sections that had been modified for purposes that were not immediately apparent. Emergency lighting flickered on, revealing rooms packed with high-level surveillance and communications gear. These weren't just basic tools. This was equipment used to intercept transmissions, analyze digital data, and run coordinated technical operations. This wasn't just a hideout, Chun said, recognizing components commonly used by American intelligence. Whoever was here was conducting serious intelligence work. Rodriguez paused at a terminal displaying files from immigration courts across various regions. These aren't random, he noted. Someone's been monitoring asylum cases and orchestrating the relocation of specific refugees into selected cities. It became clear the safe house had been an active intelligence hub, not just a storage point or temporary shelter. Cross and his team hadn't simply been laying low. They were operating from within a facility, directly tied to the networks they were trying to expose. Santos uncovered documents that painted an even broader picture. Financial transfers from accounts linked to foreign spy agencies, payment approvals for corrupt U.S. officials, and synchronized trafficking operations tailored to intelligence objectives. This goes way deeper than we thought, Natasha said, grasping the scale of what they'd found. We've just uncovered evidence of a years-long foreign intelligence campaign targeting U.S. institutions. She snapped into action. Take photos of everything you can, but we have to move now, she ordered as sounds above signaled. Police descending into the lower levels. This place will be compromised in minutes. They headed for the steam tunnel entrance, documenting critical files as they moved. Though the tunnels offered an escape route, Natasha knew the real test lay ahead, navigating 4 people through cramped underground pathways designed for lone maintenance workers. To her surprise, the tunnels were spacious enough to allow upright walking, with numerous offshoots leading to various industrial facilities. Wall-mounted maps showed a complex system that once supported dozens of factories during Laredo's manufacturing peak. Their pace underground was faster than it had been inside the building, but the oppressive air, slick surfaces, and ever-present threat of discovery pushed their mental and physical limits. After 20 minutes, Natasha's comms picked up hostile transmissions. Mexican federal forces had accessed infrastructure, maps, and were deploying units to tunnel exits across the district. They know we're in the tunnels, she warned, recalculating their route. We need to reach the border before they block every exit. Cross scanned his equipment and confirmed her fears. They're tracking us live. That gear in the safe house was compromised. They know our route. What was already a risky extraction now seemed nearly impossible. But Natasha had accounted for this scenario. Time for the emergency plan, she said, steering them toward a passage that led into the city's storm drain network. We'll lose them in the drainage system. Originally designed for intense seasonal flooding, the storm drains were huge, dry during this time of year, and perfect for covert movement. Some tunnels ran directly under the Rio Grande, offering a path to the U.S. that bypassed all official checkpoints. They descended through a maintenance shaft coated in slick grime and overwhelmed by foul odors. Conditions were dangerous, but the storm drains gave them what the steam tunnels couldn't: multiple border crossing routes and unpredictable paths. As they moved deeper, Natasha started reassessing everything. The speed and coordination of the response, the tracking tech, the multi-agency involvement, it all pointed to something much bigger. "Cross," she said. "What exactly did you uncover?" "Walking through a recently used tunnel," he responded. "The trafficking routes aren't just about moving people. They're a front for building long-term spy networks inside the U.S. They're using refugees as covert assets and corrupt officials are helping run it all." Santos added more context. "Officials in Central America are being paid to create conditions that generate the right kind of refugees, people with skills or connections useful for espionage," Shun explained. The domestic side. Border security databases have been systematically modified to allow certain individuals to cross without proper screening while flagging others for detention, based on intelligence requirements rather than actual security threats. Rodriguez completed the picture with information about the legal system. Immigration courts are processing asylum cases according to criteria provided by foreign intelligence services. Refugees who could provide useful intelligence are being granted asylum and relocated to specific cities where they can be monitored and recruited. The Operation Cross had uncovered was not just espionage but a systematic effort to reshape American immigration policy to serve foreign intelligence interests. Refugees fleeing legitimate persecution were being exploited as unwilling intelligence assets, while American officials were being corrupted to facilitate operations that undermine national security. As they approached the section of the storm drain system that passed beneath the Rio Grande, Natasha realized why so many resources were being devoted to eliminating Cross and his companions. The intelligence they possessed could expose an operation that had taken years to establish and had infiltrated the highest levels of American government agencies responsible for border security and immigration policy. The tunnel that crossed beneath the international border was larger than the others they had traveled through, with reinforced concrete construction that suggested it had been built for purposes beyond storm water management. Emergency lighting revealed that the passage had been modified with communication equipment, surveillance systems, and storage areas that indicated regular use by people conducting operations that required concealment from both American and Mexican authorities. "This tunnel is being used by the same networks we've been investigating," Rodriguez observed, photographing equipment that matched systems described in her court case files. Cross-examined communication gear that connected to networks he recognized from his intelligence work. Foreign intelligence services have been using this route for operations that require movement between countries without official border crossings. The discovery that their escape route was part of the infrastructure they had been investigating created a tactical opportunity that Natasha had not anticipated. Instead of simply using the tunnel to reach safety, they could gather additional intelligence that would strengthen their evidence and provide real-time information about ongoing operations. "Document everything, but quickly," she instructed, monitoring her communication equipment for signs that hostile forces were closing in on their location. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they realize we're using this route." The group worked with efficient precision, photographing equipment, downloading data from unsecured systems, and gathering physical evidence that would support their investigation. The tunnel contained enough intelligence to expose not just the foreign operation they had been tracking, but additional networks that were using the same infrastructure for operations that extended throughout North America. As they completed their evidence gathering and prepared to continue toward the American side of the border, Natasha's communication equipment detected transmissions that changed everything. Agent Carlos Mendez was coordinating a border patrol operation that would intercept them the moment they emerged from the tunnel system on the American side. The final phase of their extraction would require confronting not just foreign agents and cartel sicarios, but American law enforcement officers who believed they were conducting a legitimate operation to arrest suspected criminals. The intelligence Cross and his companions possessed could expose the foreign infiltration of American agencies, but only if they could survive long enough to deliver it to people who were not compromised by the very networks they were investigating. Natasha checked her weapons and communication equipment while calculating the tactical challenges of the final phase of the extraction. Getting 4 civilians across hostile territory while protecting intelligence that could reshape international relations would require using skills and resources that she had hoped never to need again. But the stakes were too high for anything less than complete success, and failure would mean that foreign intelligence operations would continue undermining American security for years to come. The tunnel exit on the American side opened into a drainage culvert that ran beneath the Union Pacific Rail Yard, where freight trains carrying legitimate cargo provided cover for the final phase of their extraction. Dawn was breaking over Laredo as Natasha led Cross and his companions through the maze of rail equipment and storage containers toward the emergency vehicle she had positioned during her initial reconnaissance. The morning shift change at the rail yard would provide additional cover, with workers arriving who would be too focused on their own activities to pay attention to 4 additional people moving through the industrial landscape. Agent Carlos Mendez had positioned his border patrol units based on intelligence that predicted their targets would emerge at one of 3 official tunnel exits, not anticipating that they would use infrastructure that existed outside federal mapping systems. His tactical deployment was professional and thorough, but it was designed to intercept people following predictable escape routes, rather than operatives trained in unconventional warfare and familiar with terrain that most law enforcement agencies did not know existed. Natasha's emergency vehicle was a maintenance truck that appeared to belong to the rail yard's engineering department, complete with legitimate work orders and identification that would pass casual inspection. The truck contained specialized communication equipment that would allow direct contact with intelligence agencies that had not been compromised by foreign infiltration, as well as evidence storage systems that would preserve the integrity of the materials Cross and his companions had gathered. As they reached the vehicle, Natasha's communication equipment detected transmissions that indicated Mendez had realized his targets were not going to appear at the predicted locations. Border Patrol units were expanding their search pattern to include the industrial areas adjacent to the official crossing points, using methods that would eventually lead them to the rail yard if given sufficient time. "We have approximately 15 minutes before Border Patrol units reach this area," Natasha informed the group while starting the truck and checking its communication systems. Emergency protocol requires immediate contact with clean intelligence assets to arrange secure transfer of evidence. Cross activated encrypted communication equipment that connected directly to Director Helen Blackwood's emergency frequency, bypassing normal operational channels that might be monitored by compromised personnel. Control, this is package extraction successful with additional intelligence assets. Request immediate secure transfer to uncompromised facility. Blackwood's response revealed the extent of the crisis that Cross's investigation had uncovered. Package, be advised that foreign infiltration extends to agencies responsible for intelligence analysis and operational coordination. Standard secure facilities cannot be trusted. Emergency protocols in effect. Proceed to alternative location, Zebra 7 for debriefing and evidence processing. Alternative location Zebra 7 was a designation Natasha recognized from training. Exercises that prepared intelligence operatives for scenarios where normal support structures had been compromised by hostile action. The facility was operated by a joint task force that included personnel from multiple agencies, selected specifically because their backgrounds made them unlikely targets for foreign recruitment, and their operational security made infiltration nearly impossible. The drive to the emergency facility required traveling through sections of Laredo that were under routine surveillance by multiple law enforcement agencies, using routes that would appear normal to casual observation while avoiding patterns that might trigger automated monitoring systems. Natasha drove with the practiced skill of someone who had learned to blend into traffic while maintaining constant awareness of potential threats and escape routes. 20 minutes into their journey, the truck's communication system detected radio traffic that indicated Border Patrol units had discovered evidence of their passage through the rail yard. Mendez was coordinating a comprehensive search operation that included requests for assistance from Texas Rangers, FBI field agents, and Department of Homeland Security personnel who believed they were pursuing dangerous criminals rather than American intelligence operatives carrying evidence of foreign infiltration. Control: hostile forces are coordinating multi-agency pursuit. Request authorization for defensive countermeasures. Natasha transmitted while taking a route that would delay their pursuers without creating obvious evidence of evasion. Negative on defensive measures against American law enforcement personnel. Foreign agents are using official channels to coordinate elimination of package and evidence. Any engagement with American personnel will be used to justify lethal force authorization. The tactical situation had become a maze of conflicting loyalties and authorities, where the people trying to kill them included both foreign agents and American officers who believed they were conducting legitimate law enforcement operations. Success would require avoiding confrontation with legitimate authorities, while neutralizing foreign agents who were using official cover to coordinate their elimination. As they approached the emergency facility, Natasha realized that the final phase of the operation would be the most dangerous. Foreign agents who had spent years infiltrating American agencies would not abandon their networks without attempting to eliminate the evidence that could expose them. The facility itself might be under surveillance or infiltration by personnel who appeared to have legitimate access, but were actually serving foreign interests. The emergency facility was located in a business park that appeared to house normal commercial operations, software companies, accounting firms, and consulting services that provided cover for intelligence activities that required complete deniability. The specific building they sought was identified only by an address that corresponded to a company listed as providing government accounting services, a designation that allowed legitimate access by personnel with appropriate security clearances. Director Helen Blackwood met them in the building's parking garage, accompanied by 3 individuals whose bearing and equipment identified them as intelligence operatives with authorization for the highest levels of classified operations. Blackwood looked older than during their last meeting, with stress lines that suggested she had been dealing with crisis situations that extended far beyond Cross's extraction. The scope of foreign infiltration exceeds our worst-case projections, Blackwood explained while leading them to an elevator that required biometric identification and security codes that changed every 30 minutes. Cross's investigation revealed networks that have been operational for at least 5 years, with assets and agencies responsible for border security, immigration policy, and intelligence analysis. The elevator descended to levels that did not appear on the building's architectural plans, opening into a facility that contained communication systems, analysis equipment, and security measures that rivaled anything used by major intelligence agencies. The facility was designed to operate independently of normal government infrastructure, with power generation, communication systems, and personnel support that could function even if hostile action compromised standard intelligence operations. Cross, Santos-Chun, and Rodriguez were separated for individual debriefing sessions that would allow intelligence analysts to process their evidence without contamination or collaboration that might affect the accuracy of their testimony. Each had uncovered different aspects of the foreign operation, and their combined intelligence would provide a comprehensive picture of infiltration activities that had been developing for years. Natasha was debriefed by Blackwood personally, in a secure room that contained recording equipment designed to capture testimony that might be used in prosecutions that would reshape American intelligence operations. The session lasted 4 hours, during which Natasha provided detailed accounts of the extraction operation, the evidence discovered in the Nuevo Laredo facility, and the tactical coordination that had been used against them. Your performance during this operation demonstrated that Ghost Protocol assets retain operational capabilities that justify reactivation, Blackwood concluded, reviewing notes that would determine Natasha's future assignments. However, the foreign infiltration you helped expose means that standard intelligence operations will require complete restructuring. The implications of Blackwood's statement became clear as Natasha learned about the scope of the investigation that Cross's evidence had triggered. Foreign intelligence services had succeeded in placing assets within the State Department, Border Patrol, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and several other agencies responsible for national security operations. The infiltration was comprehensive, enough that normal intelligence activities could not continue until the networks had been identified and eliminated. What happens to the people we extracted? Natasha asked, understanding that Santos, Chun, and Rodriguez had sacrificed their previous lives to expose operations that most people would never know had existed. Witness protection with new identities and financial support that will allow them to rebuild their lives. Their courage prevented foreign intelligence operations that could have continued for years without detection. Blackwood paused, consulting classified documents that revealed the full scope of what had been prevented. The trafficking networks they exposed were being used to insert over 200 foreign agents into the United States over the past 3 years. The number of foreign agents that had been successfully infiltrated explained why the operation to eliminate Cross and his evidence had involved such extensive resources. Foreign intelligence services had invested years of planning and millions of dollars in operations that Cross's investigation had threatened to expose completely. As the debriefing concluded, Natasha was presented with options for her future that reflected the success of the extraction operation and the ongoing crisis in American intelligence operations. Ghost Protocol status could be terminated, allowing her to return to active intelligence work with assignments that would utilize her demonstrated capabilities. Alternatively, she could accept a new deep cover assignment that would position her to identify and neutralize foreign infiltration in agencies that had not yet been compromised. There's a third option, Blackwood explained, showing Natasha personnel files that revealed the scope of the reorganization that would be required to secure American intelligence operations. Leadership position in the task force responsible for rebuilding compromised agencies. Your experience with foreign intelligence methods and deep cover operations makes you uniquely qualified to design security measures that will prevent future infiltration. The leadership position represented recognition that Natasha's skills extended beyond operational capabilities to strategic planning and organizational development. 3 years of successful deep cover operations in Laredo had demonstrated her ability to build and maintain complex identities while remaining operationally effective. The extraction of Cross and his companions had proven that she could coordinate sophisticated operations under extreme pressure, while protecting assets whose loss would have catastrophic consequences. 6 months later, Natasha sat in an office in the newly constructed Counterintelligence Operations Center, reviewing reports from field agents who were implementing security measures designed to prevent the type of foreign infiltration that Cross had exposed. The center operated with personnel who had been selected through screening processes that included psychological evaluation, financial investigation, and operational testing that would identify potential foreign recruitment targets. The investigation, triggered by Cross's evidence, had resulted in the prosecution of 47 American officials who had been recruited or compromised by foreign intelligence services. Immigration courts had been restructured with new judges and security procedures that prevented manipulation of asylum cases. Border security databases had been completely rebuilt with access controls that prevented unauthorized modification of crossing records and background check results. Agent Carlos Mendez had been cleared of any involvement in foreign operations, but had requested transfer to a different assignment after learning how his investigation of Natasha had been manipulated by foreign agents seeking to eliminate her before she could threaten their networks. His final report on the case included recommendations for improved coordination between agencies and better identification of operations that served foreign rather than American interests. Maria Santos had been relocated to a position with an international journalism organization where her expertise in documenting government corruption could be used to expose foreign operations in other countries. David Chun had accepted a position with the reformed Border Patrol, where his knowledge of foreign infiltration methods was being used to train personnel in identifying and preventing future compromise of security systems. Lisa Rodriguez had been appointed to a federal judgeship where her understanding of foreign manipulation of immigration procedures would help ensure that asylum cases were decided based on legitimate refugee criteria rather than intelligence requirements. Vincent Cross had been promoted to a senior position in the State Department's Counterintelligence Division, where his investigation techniques were being used to identify foreign operations that had not yet been exposed. His work continued to uncover networks that extended beyond immigration and border security to include foreign efforts to influence American policy through corruption of officials in multiple government agencies. The bookstore in Laredo, where Natasha had spent 3 years, remained closed. Its inventory donated to local schools and community organizations that served the immigrant families she had helped during her time as a civilian. The building had been purchased by a nonprofit organization that continued to provide immigration assistance and legal support, maintaining the community service mission that had been Natasha's cover but had become genuinely important to her during her years of exile. On quiet evenings when her current work permitted personal reflection, Natasha sometimes thought about the people she had helped during her time as Ghost Protocol. Families who had navigated complex immigration procedures with her assistance. Individuals who had found safety in the United States because she had guided them through bureaucratic mazes that were designed to discourage rather than assist. Those relationships had been genuine, even though her identity had been fabricated, and the community she had served had provided something that her intelligence career had never offered: the satisfaction of helping people openly rather than protecting them through actions they would never know had occurred. The Counterintelligence Operations Center represented a new phase in American intelligence operations, designed to prevent the type of foreign infiltration that had nearly succeeded in compromising border security and immigration policy. Personnel worked with security clearances that included ongoing psychological evaluation and financial monitoring to identify potential recruitment targets before foreign intelligence services could approach them. Operations were conducted with oversight procedures that prevented individual agents from gaining access to enough information to compromise entire networks. Natasha's role in designing these security measures reflected lessons learned during her years of deep cover operations and the extraction that had exposed foreign infiltration. She understood both the methods foreign intelligence services used to recruit American officials and the operational security procedures that could prevent successful infiltration. Her experience with Ghost Protocol had taught her how to build and maintain identities that could withstand investigation, knowledge that was essential for creating security measures that could detect false identities used by foreign agents. The work was less dramatic than field operations, but equally important for national security. Foreign intelligence services continued to develop new methods for infiltrating American government agencies, and preventing their success required constant adaptation of security measures and operational procedures. The Counterintelligence Operations Center served as a laboratory for developing techniques that could identify and neutralize foreign operations before they achieved their objectives. As Natasha reviewed the latest reports from field agents, her secure communication system activated with a message that used emergency codes she had hoped never to see again. Foreign intelligence services had begun operations designed to infiltrate the reformed agencies, using methods that indicated they had learned from the failure of their previous networks. New infiltration attempts were being detected at multiple levels, suggesting a coordinated effort to rebuild the capabilities that Cross's investigation had exposed and eliminated. The message contained authorization for a new operation that would require her to return to deep cover, this time within foreign intelligence networks themselves, rather than American agencies. The mission would involve infiltrating foreign operations at their source, gathering intelligence about recruitment, methods, and operational procedures that could be used to prevent future infiltration of American agencies. Natasha accepted the assignment with the understanding that success would require her to disappear again, leaving behind the life she had built within the American intelligence community to become someone else entirely. The work of protecting American security never truly ended. It simply moved to different locations and required different identities as foreign threats evolved and adapted to American countermeasures. 6 months later, a woman calling herself Elena Marchetti arrived in Prague, carrying documentation that identified her as a translator specializing in Eastern European languages and seeking employment with international organizations that operated in regions where American intelligence agencies maintained minimal presence. Her background would withstand investigation by foreign intelligence services looking for potential recruitment targets, and her expertise would make her valuable to organizations that needed personnel capable of operating in multiple countries and languages. The woman who had once been Natasha Romano, and before that, Natasha Volkov, began the process of building another identity that would allow her to serve American interests while appearing to be exactly what foreign intelligence services were seeking. The cycle of deep cover operations continued, with each assignment building on lessons learned from previous missions and adapting to threats that evolved as quickly as the methods used to counter them. The quiet bookstore in Laredo remained a memory of a time when her mission had been simple: maintain cover and wait for activation. But that simplicity had been an illusion, and the real work of intelligence operations required constant adaptation to threats that never stopped evolving. In Prague, Elena Marchetti began the patient work of infiltrating foreign networks, carrying with her the knowledge that somewhere in America, people like Cross, Santos, Chen, and Rodriguez continued their own work of protecting the security and integrity of the country they served. The story of Border Patrol detaining her until the State Department confirmed her ghost protocol status had become part of classified operational history, a case study in how foreign infiltration could be detected and eliminated through careful intelligence work and operational courage. But for the woman who had lived that story, it represented just one chapter in a career dedicated to protecting American interests through work that would never be publicly acknowledged or celebrated. In rooms where classified operations were planned and executed, her success was measured not by recognition or promotion, but by missions completed and threats eliminated. The extraction that had saved Cross and exposed foreign infiltration had been successful, precisely because it had been conducted by someone whose identity could be sacrificed if necessary, and whose loyalty had been tested through years of isolation and operational pressure. As Elena Marchetti settled into her new life in Prague, preparing for infiltration operations that would take years to complete, she carried with her the quiet satisfaction of work well done and the knowledge that somewhere in Texas, families continued to receive help with immigration procedures from people who understood that serving others was the highest form of service to country. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.